Hey everybody, really quickly before we get into today's episode. This is just going to be a quick friendly reminder about my buddy who helps me tremendously behind the scenes. He works pretty tirelessly finding stories and accumulating them and putting them all together in this nice packaged and perfectly wrapped thing so that I can read them and do all this fun stuff and hand them over to you guys to listen to. Other than that, he actually already has books published, and one of them being Magyar Monsters. I guarantee most of you listening would, especially those who are, bookworms and like horror stuff and like all the, the spooky stuff, whether it be nonfiction or fiction. Within Magyar Monsters, there is quite a few stories that I think that you'll enjoy. One of them is Last Call, wherein something more than human comes into the bar after hours. Another one is Monster Canyon, where a prospector finds more than he bargained for on his hunt for gold. Skinwalk with Me, a cult classic in the folk horror community, and this one follows a Navajo shaman's descent into madness after his tribe is massacred. And last but not least, The Lion and the Pilot, which is basically his flagship piece of writing. It won back-to-back horror awards last year and is based on a true story. This version follows a search and rescue pilot dealing with a nightmare along the Magyar Rim. So, with all that being said, again, this is just a friendly reminder to please go check him out, go get his book, follow him on Facebook, and he's got more projects in store for the future that I will continue to plug and let you guys know about, but I cannot emphasize this enough. Dude is tremendously crucial to keeping this channel up and running and operating the way it does because he finds all the stories and does all the legwork for me, which is the biggest help in the world. All I got to do is plop myself down and read and edit and then do all the rest of the bullshit that comes along with it. But all right, I'm going to shut up now. Please go follow him on Facebook and please go check out and buy his book. I would greatly appreciate it if you did, and I know he would as well. All right, let's get into today's stories. I have a story for you, but I'd like to remain anonymous. This all took place back in 2022. I applied for a remote proofreading job via LinkedIn with a known company, or at least I thought it was. I was contacted via email by a gentleman named Alex to find out my availability for the interview. I interviewed over Skype, then with Marlon, which was a series of questions. I never actually talked to him. This should have been the first red flag, I know. Marlon advised me several minutes after submitting my answers to the review team that I was hired. I completed a 1099 with my name and address only, signed the contract. I was then advised I needed to have a check sent to me, which I would sign and deposit into my account, then use the funds towards a workstation needed for the job and pay a vendor with it. All of this sounded kind of weird, but they used a lot of buzzwords that were just exactly what I wanted to hear in the moment. Signing a check, sending me cash in advance, paying a vendor, buying all my own equipment. I know it all sounds scammy, but moment, I was a guy looking for a job. They were a company willing to send me several $1,000s as well to hire me. What kind of scam involves sending me money directly first? I couldn't think of one. So I just considered myself very lucky, fortunate to have such a cool opportunity before me. But alas, here I am, submitting my own personal horror story. The $3,000 check from the company showed as available in my personal checking account right away. So I relied on the bank to see what the funds were available and thought they could be used. I was asked by the vendor, whose name was Kim, via text to make payments in increments to equal the $3,000. 2 were made through Zelle in the amount of $500, each to an individual, then 1 through Venmo in the amount of $1,000 to another individual. I did not know either of them personally. I know what you're all thinking. How could you be so stupid? This was money that simply appeared in my account. I thought this was simply some kind of protocol for the company to get me integrated. Everything seemed official, and there was company money in my account, or so I thought. so it all seemed very legitimate. And on top of all of that, when someone hands you money with instructions, you simply do what you're told. Otherwise, it's theft. Know what I mean? Once the money showed up, I felt like I was on the hook. Otherwise, I'd be in some form of trouble. I knew the money from the $3,000 check was not my own, but I thought I could pay the remainder of what was due to the vendor from that check and still have existing funds that were already in my account. If I knew the funds were not yet available, I would have never made any further transaction. This all took place over Labor Day weekend in 2022. So what happened is this: because that money was so new to my account, it was technically still pending. So all the funds that I paid from my account were actually my own cash, not from the $3,000 that was holding. All good, I just figured I'd do a swap and let the new cash fill in more what I was shelling out for my savings. I received a call from the bank the day after Labor Day, advising me that the check was fraudulent. There was no hold place on the check. In the meantime, my checking account balance had gone into the negative. I was advised by them not to communicate with any of the individuals involved and to immediately file a police report, which I did that day. The $3,000 was now null and void, and on top of that, I'd sent out every dime that I had to these vendors and then some. This was turning into a dark, hopeless situation. I received an email from Alex and a text from Kim about sending the rest of the funds, the workstation to be shipped to my home address. Needless to say, I did not respond to their request, nor did I hear from them again. I kept all the correspondence and filed reports with several agencies. I'm employed full-time and was in the midst of trying to earn some additional income during some hard times, particularly while COVID was still rampant. I failed to recognize the signs of a scam, was caught in a weak moment because of the day of my interview, was late to my grandmother's birthday. So I took my new hire as a good sign. It made me sick to be taken so advantage of by people from the seedy side of the web, especially when I'm just trying to do right by my family in a world without a lot of work. My wife and I are a one-income household. She is disabled, still in the process of applying for federal benefits. I was trying to do what I could to make ends meet. This really hurt us. The whole situation still has us very upset. It makes me feel especially like a failure after all this time. I need to reach out to 988 as the situation has been very traumatizing. I also had taken some time off from my job after it took place. I have anxiety and depression for which I'm treated, which obviously had worsened since this event occurred. For people that this has happened to, there is no form of relief, only brutal, blistering shame. All we can do is hide it. God forbid someone find out that I've been swindled, and then I have to explain that I'm both naive and penniless. The agencies that I filed the report with either did not contact me back or they were unable to help me. I was beyond defeated and had very dark thoughts after this realization. I really only saw one way out. Thankfully, I was brought back to my senses and have then just done my best to deal with the situation itself. I followed up with the police and they were really unable to do anything further for me. Just continued to advise me that I need to contact Attorney General's office, which I had already done that. I tried working with my bank, but they informed me that since Venmo and Zelle activity was initiated and authorized by me, the dispute claims for both were denied. Evidently, there's some kind of regulation known as Reg E that does not provide protection for consumers in the event of authorized payments resulting from scams. Therefore, I'm shit out of luck. As far as I know, the Skype account, the Venmo account, and the Zelle account for all those individuals involved are still active. There's something especially damning about that, how no one saw any consequences but me. These people didn't lose any sleep, didn't have to run or vanish. They still use the same accounts to pull their scams. It blows my mind that there are agencies and law enforcement, and tons of paper trails and evidence to back everything up. Still, they are powerless to do anything. What kind of world do we live in where people can do this in broad daylight and never ever get caught? I do not know all the steps that the police took with this issue, what protocols were followed, or if they just concluded this likely occurred overseas, as the officer who was assigned to my case had mentioned to me. I realized this situation is not as big as many of the other issues the police encounter, but I was hoping a more thorough investigation would have been concluded. Scammers therefore continue to get away with their misdeeds. I understand that there was no unauthorized activity in my accounts, and that I initiated these payments. However, I never would have done so if I knew these were fraudsters and part of some giant scam. Electronically, the funds showed up as available on my mobile app, which is misleading. If I knew they were unavailable, it would have delayed me from making any transactions until I heard back from my bank and that the check was fraudulent. I paid a heavy price for it against my better judgment, since I'm out $2,000. I've since taken additional measures and am much more cautious when applying for and researching online jobs. I was able to since find a stable and legitimate part-time position, get back on track with my life for the most part. I'd be lying if I told you this whole issue doesn't haunt me still, whenever I think about it. Never had anything like this happen to me before. Nothing that at least doesn't involve money being sent and stolen from me. What a creative way to bleed accounts dry. All of this was digital crime, all online of course. But there was one night in the thick of it that something happened in real life. It was after I learned the whole thing was a scam, but right before I made that official report. It was a late night for my wife and I, and even as she turned in for bed, I found I couldn't fall asleep. I toddled from the bedroom to the living room into the office before settling in a chair and just staring up at the ceiling. I was trying to clear my mind in the dead of night. And that's when I thought I heard a knock at the door. I looked down and waited. Nothing came again. I figured I was just hearing things, a symptom of my distressed state of mind. It did, however, spook me enough to bring me back to the real world, at which point I got myself together and went to bed. It wasn't until the next morning when I went outside for my morning coffee that I found a letter taped to my front door. Very unusual for my house. Unusual for my neighborhood, and with the current situation going on, I was very careful. I removed that letter carefully, brought it inside, and called the investigator handling my case for further instruction. He told me to wait, and it needed to go into evidence. They did whatever they do and yielded no results. No DNA, no fingerprints, nothing, just a bare white envelope with a letter in it. When we opened it up, all it said was thanks, in printed letters. To this day, I have no idea if it was related, but the timing was impeccable. The cleanliness of the letter and envelope were also suspicious. Either way, it garnered no leads and just went into the evidence pile. The scariest part was that perhaps somebody knew where I lived, even knew that I was awake that one night. It made me wonder how compromised all my devices were. To this day, nobody was ever caught and probably never will be. You can all add insult to injury, but trust me, I've heard it a lot since this happened and I wish it never did. I wanted to share my story because I don't want to see what happened to me happen to anybody else. I've always loved my neighborhood. It's quiet, friendly, the kind of place where you can leave your doors unlocked without worrying about anything. I've lived in these suburbs pretty much my whole life. They've always been cute, quaint, and exactly what people expect when they envision Midtown America. We don't all know each other's names or anything, this isn't Mayberry, but we did all have a good understanding of the community and how things flowed. Crime was at a minimum, at least from what I recall. But as we know, those kind of things can always change. During the COVID pandemic, that's when it happened for us. Strange faces started appearing, and I noticed people who didn't quite fit in. This was definitely happening all over the US. People were flooding out of cities by the hundreds if not thousands, and overflowed into the little outskirt communities and suburbs. thinking they would be more lax with protocols and procedures. And whereas they were right, that was only because we had a limited population. Once an extra 10,000 people rolled into town, filled up the hotels, and started sleeping in their cars on the streets, things changed and we had the same laws and restrictions as those big cities. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but as the weeks went by, I realized that something was off. It wasn't anything major, but definitely found its way onto my radar. I was working from home at the time, and with less to do. I found myself keeping an eye on the neighborhood. And that's when I saw this beat-up old car with rusted wheel wells and shrouded windows. It just looked like trouble, parked in front of the Johnson house, where high school-age kids lived. I thought maybe it belonged to a visiting friend, but something about it just made me uneasy. This was the thing that had me feeling off, as I'd never seen such a questionable car inside our neighborhood. I kept an eye on it, but didn't see anyone or anything. "Hey, hun, come check this out," I called to my wife, nodding towards the window. She came over and peered out onto the street. What am I looking at?" "That car, doesn't it just look off to you?" She frowned. "Maybe it's just a friend visiting the kids over there," she asked, pointing to the Johnson house. Yeah, maybe you're right," I said, dismissing it. "I just came to this weird conclusion, it looks off." We agreed that it was out of place, but there was nothing else really to do, not unless we wanted to call the police, and I wasn't that invested. It just felt definitely overboard in the moment, crossing a line, so to speak. It's probably nothing anyway, but we made a note to keep an eye on the street and see if it left. It did, sporadically, coming and going at random intervals, and all without ever seeing the driver. It was mysterious, but not the end of the world. So I ended up just forgetting about it. It was probably just COVID paranoia clouding up my brain. Fast forward a week, I noticed the police are now patrolling the neighborhood. Now that was unusual. We never saw cops around here unless it was a speeding ticket or a lost cat. I didn't put two and two together at first, just figured it was a random patrol. Or maybe they were looking for some troublemaking kids. Not the first time a group of high schoolers would tear through backyards to get away from whatever nonsense that they had orchestrated. They patrolled one day and then the next. And by day 3, I remembered that weird car and thought, maybe something is up after all. Then I saw an officer taking a report from the house next to the Johnsons. My curiosity was piqued at this point. What else did I need, It was pretty obvious that something was going on at this point. And I was being nosy and wanted to know the severity. I watched from my window as the neighbor explained something in what looked like vague detail to the officer, who was writing it all down. "What's going on?" I asked my wife, as we watched the officer nodding and taking notes. "Maybe somebody reported a suspicious person," she suggested. "Or maybe they were having a party over there. Aren't we not supposed to have gatherings larger than 6 or something like that?" She was right, this was pretty early on in COVID, and we did have those stupid rules in place like that. I was suddenly put back at ease. It probably had to be something with COVID, probably something really stupid, and here I had myself all worked up. Still though, I kept an eye on the scene until that cop left and everything went back to quiet. My wife and I settled in, hung around, had dinner, and forgot about the weirdness just outside. We sat down to watch some Netflix for the evening and found that we couldn't get anything to work. The internet was connected, but the speed was non-existent. Nothing would load, only spinning buffer circles. After a few minutes of tinkering, we didn't know what else to do. A couple of calls to friends, to customer service, and nobody had an answer. We tried resetting the router, and that worked, but only for a minute. Finally, we gave up and just hung out on the couch. As the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was definitely weird and off. I kept glancing out the window. That's when I saw them out there again. An unmarked police cruiser, parked down the lane, partially hidden. My heart began to race as I realized Whatever was going on, it was serious this time. Could that have been what knocked out the internet? "Hey, hon, come take a look at this," I whispered, nodding to the police car. She peered out the window, her eyes widening. "What are they doing out there?" I shook my head. "I don't know, but I'm definitely going to find out tomorrow." We huddled at the window for a little bit longer, waiting to see if anything else happened. It didn't. Nothing stirred, no lights, no sounds. We talked about it amongst ourselves again, maybe thinking it could be connected. And if it was, how? And above all that, why? Why was all this weird shit happening all of a sudden? Again, I know we were probably just a little on edge from being literally invaded with COVID refugees and all kinds of other awful stories about squatters and the like. Or even the whole communities being taken over by wackadoos. As we went to bed, I couldn't shake that feeling still. Something's going on in our quiet neighborhood, and I was determined to get to the bottom of it. "I'm going to talk to the neighbors tomorrow," I told my wife as we settled in. "Maybe even the police too." She nodded with her eyes still fixed on the window. "All right, hon, but be careful." I nodded, but as I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't shake that feeling. The feeling that we were caught up in something that we definitely shouldn't be. The next morning I popped up, got myself ready for the day, then just bided my time until I thought it'd be appropriate to cross the street and start my line of questioning. I almost wanted to see if the neighbors were up and about, maybe even come outside before I went out and bothered them. I was nervous about what I might discover. Also, I was nervous that I wouldn't discover anything at all. I walked over to the neighbor's house just a minute later, feeling this sense of unease. The street was empty. No sign of that strange car or the police car. That was kind of annoying because they were like my go-to pieces of that weirdo evidence, the cars on the block. Without them there, I was without anything tangible to show them, if that makes any sense. Either way, I went up to the door and knocked, and after a brief moment, it opened to reveal my neighbor, all clean cut and looking sharp. Least suspicious guy in the world. "Hey man, what's up?" I asked, trying to sound super casual. "Not much," he replied, stepping aside to let me in. "Just dealing with some weird internet issues." I nodded sympathetically. "Yeah, we've been having some trouble too, but the police were here, right? What was that all about?" He hesitated, looking around nervously. "To be honest with you, I'm not really sure. They just asked us some questions about our web activity and then took a statement." I frowned. "That's weird. Did they say what it was about?" He shook his head. "No, they just said it was some kind of security matter." We talked a bit more and I mentioned the car, but he didn't know anything about it. He said he was just having web trouble, pretty much the exact same issues that we were having. And then his internet service provider actually reached out to him, advised him to unplug his modem and his router, everything that made the network, and wait from there. He thought it sounded like a scam or something, but it turned out it was a legit company, so he did as instructed. The next day, the police showed up, confiscated the equipment, and that's the last he's heard. We said our goodbyes after that, and then I went on my way. I left his house feeling more perplexed than ever. As I walked back home, I decided I'd try my internet again. Maybe it was working now. But when I connected, I found that it was still not working properly. It said connected, but I couldn't access any websites or send messages. Whatever it was like it didn't want anything outbound at all. I spent the next hour troubleshooting, scanning for viruses, and checking for any possible hiccups that might be causing any issues. I didn't find shit, so as a last-ditch option, I unplugged everything and let it sit for a while. And then when I plugged it back in, I reset the network and changed both the name and the password. For some reason in the moment, I thought this might help. As this was all going along, I just happened to take a look outside, and there, I saw that dingy piece of crap car. I knew it had to be involved in what the hell was going on. 2 houses with no internet, police patrolling at all hours. It sounds like a straight up conspiracy, I know. But I finished up my network stuff and hopped on my phone, which still worked without Wi-Fi. Started looking for answers there, mostly just on Reddit. Most of the posts and comments that I was finding talked about compromised internet security, but that couldn't be us. My wife and I didn't open spam or visit funky websites or anything of the sort. Just then, there was a heavy knock at our door. I hesitated, feeling a sense of dread. Who could that be? The police coming to take my modem now? I thought about my neighbor and the cops coming to take his stuff. It's definitely a spooky feeling in the moment, so I sympathized with him. I thought maybe he was up to something no good, something private. Maybe the cops caught him and were in the middle of a bust or something. I knew I wasn't up to anything nefarious, but someone was here anyway. I slowly make my way to the door and open it, to find a disheveled young man walking away from my entryway. It was like he knocked and then all of a sudden got cold feet. Remember, it took me a minute to actually get up and answer the door. I figured maybe he just got tired of waiting. Figured I wasn't home. Either way, this dopey looking kid definitely wasn't the cops. Hey, wait! I called out, feeling a sense of unease. What'd you need? He turned back and his eyes were sunken and skin pale. Why'd you do that? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He then stopped in place and kept his beady little eyes on me. Do what? Why'd you do that? He asked again, but this time he almost screamed it. It was like some truly unhinged psycho stuff, eyes bulging out of his head, spit flying out of his mouth. I could tell whatever this kid was talking about. He was pissed, definitely feeling some kind of passion. Still, I'd never seen him before, I've never dealt with him, so I didn't really know what to say or how to respond. He shook his head and walked away, leaving me even more confused and uneasy than ever. As I watched him disappear into the distance, I realized that I was definitely out of my element with all this. Internet issues, the police visit, the strange car. It has to be connected. It was all closing in on us. I'm not a cop, I'm not an investigator, I'm not even really a fighter. I just felt the weight and proximity of something potentially dangerous. I wanted out. I wanted police on site immediately. I stepped back inside, my heart racing with fear. What is going on and why am I now being targeted? As I waited for my wife to come home, I couldn't shake that feeling that we were in grave danger. The slow burn of unease had turned into a raging fire of dread. I figured the cops would show up any minute to throw me in the slammer, but for what? Who knows? Maybe someone was framing me right then and there, loading all kinds of crazy illegal shit onto my computer and tablet, without me even knowing about it. Because that could happen, right? My wife got home and we talked it out. I filled her in on all the weird happenings. She agreed that we needed to contact the authorities and find out exactly what's going on. They were all too eager to come over the next day, and from our little meeting, got the scoop. The police were trying to pinpoint a person they were building a case against. It turned out to be the guy that knocked on our door that day. His name was Kevin or Keith, something like that, and he was a newly displaced COVID refugee, homeless and half out of his mind. The thing about Kevin was that he was a techie, and he had an overflowing well of knowledge on computers and computer science. Kevin had been driving around the Midwest, bumming internet here and there. It started with coffee shops and random stores, gas stations, really anywhere without an unprotected link. Some of these networks blocked access and permissions though, so Kevin got pretty good at routing these firewalls and restrictors. Over time, with prolonged drug use and a dwindling relationship with reality, Kevin started going down all kinds of rabbit holes of conspiracy. He also stopped sleeping apparently, just aimlessly driving from town to town, state to state. As it went on, he started using private networks, as he figured out how to get into most of them. Some kind of weird backdoor access, with all the people who hadn't changed their stock network password. He wanted to use private networks because Kevin was looking at crazy shit on the dark web, conspiracy stuff, and mountains of illegal images. I don't even want to say what kind. That's when he landed on our street. No one knows why he came here or where he came from or what his actual plan was. The guy was using uppers every chance he got, mostly pills, as he had a prescription but also had meth in his car. Kevin had worked his way through 3 states just to do drugs and steal internet while parked out in front of my house. With his windows shrouded just enough, we couldn't see him in there. Although after the cops finally busted him, they said he opened up the space between his backseat and trunk to further cut it out so he could hide out in there without people seeing him. After they had the case built up with enough evidence and surveillance, then had him pretty much cornered out there on the street that afternoon, they sprung and arrested him. When they got the car opened, it almost looked like something out of Mad Max or RoboCop. Wires running everywhere, batteries hooked up to all kinds of things, light bars and power packs. Even had this little fan rigged up inside the trunk. It was incredible and actually impressive to see. This kid was probably a legitimate genius, but didn't have a useful capacity for it. Got arrested, but not for very long. Car was towed away, never to be seen again. I hope trying out got that kid on the straight and narrow. Drugs do weird things to people. World events do even weirder things to people, like COVID. But I guess nothing gets a person more out of whack than the internet does. I have a story that's about the dark web or something adjacent to it. I'm not really sure, but it was definitely one of the scariest things that's ever happened to me. This was in 2013 or 2014, my sophomore year, because none of us could drive yet. I'm a girl and most of my friends were girls at the time. Liked to wander around downtown until our parents just made us go home. We all kind of lived close, so it wasn't a big deal to meet up at the corner and then just harass all the nice people out for an evening stroll. The art district downtown was our playground in high school. We'd spend hours exploring the vibrant streets, admiring murals and sipping coffee at elected cafes. There wasn't a lot to do where we lived, so it was either roaming the city or getting kicked out of the mall. We all preferred to be outside, so we stuck to the sidewalks. One evening, as we strolled by a dimly lit alley, we stumbled upon a group of kids that were huddled up around something on the wall. With our curiosity piqued, we decided to return later and investigate for ourselves. It was really weird, whatever they were doing, because as we walked by the alley entrance, they all stood upright, acted all nonchalant like we couldn't see them. As we continued onward though, they went right back to the wall and kept fidgeting with whatever was back there. Again, with there being hyper limited activities for kids downtown, we were beyond invested in whatever those people were up to. We posted up at a street light down the road, just a bit, and waited for them to come back out. After like an hour, they finally did. The hell could have kept their interest for so long? We waited for them to walk out of sight before we ventured back the way they came. As we made our way back to the alley, the sun was dipping below the rooftops, casting long shadows. The air grew thick with this eerie silence, like the brick and mortar cut off the rest of the world from us. We knew the sun was going down, but it was dark back there, darker than I was expecting it to be. It's kind of hard to make out any of the finer details. We approached the spot, our hearts beating in unison. "What do you think they were doing back here?" my friend Emily whispered, her eyes scanning to the walls. I shook my head, my gaze fixed on the spot where the kids had been. That's when I saw a USB port, sealed between the bricks, gleaming in the fading light. It was totally sealed in the brick, just a port for someone to come up and hook up to. "Guys, look at this," I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. They all gathered around me, their faces reflecting in my own mix of fascination and trepidation. The port seemed out of place, like a secret hidden in plain sight kind of thing. The hell could it be for? One of the strangest things I'd ever seen. Who put it there and why? Why make it accessible? "This is freaky," Emily said, her voice trembling. I laughed and pushed her shoulder, trying to make light of it. "Oh, come on, Em. Those kids were messing with it. It's probably anime or some kind of nerdy stuff." Everyone then shared a collective laugh. It's true, we did see other kids playing with it, so it's not like some greasy guy in a trench coat was loitering back here, trying to get us to hook up to it. Still, I was super curious, so I had to ask. "Should we see what's on it?" "I don't know," Emily said. "Come on, it's probably nothing," I shot back. My friends exchanged nervous glances, but I was resolute. Rummaged through my backpack, producing a couple of adapter cables. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" my friend Sarah asked, her eyes widening with concern. She was already known for being a buzzkill, so I didn't really pay her any attention. I smiled, my heart pounding with excitement. "Come on, it'll be fun, guys." With a deep breath, I plugged the USB into my iPhone. The device buzzed to life, downloading gigabytes of data. I couldn't wait to see what kind of weird stuff we might discover, or maybe some secret diary. Who knows? Looking back, I feel like a total dumbass for just hooking up my personal device to some random port in the middle of the city. Either way, my phone restarted, and we waited in silence, our eyes fixed on the screen. What would it show? Whose secrets would start playing across my screen now? We all started talking and laughing, feeling the fun bleed back into the group. It started as a worry, but now that the phone hadn't blown up, we went back to giggling. The phone booted up again. We all exhaled collectively. Nothing seemed to happen though. We laughed, relieved, and began to walk away. I tried to access the gig of whatever I just downloaded, but I couldn't. We were on the move now. I told myself I'd look at it later and delete it if necessary. We carried on the rest of the evening without incident, till it was curfew and I had to go home. I made the solo march back to my place, tinkering with my phone, and found that literally nothing was different. Whatever had been downloaded has apparently erased itself because there was nothing in my history nor my downloads. Satisfied, I went to bed thinking nothing more about it. As the days passed though, my phone's erratic behavior was escalating. Apps opened and closed on their own. Messages sent to my friends made no sense. My financial apps were useless. I couldn't even check my email. I felt like I was losing control, but my embarrassment kept me silent. Out of everything, my banking apps were the weirdest. I mean, I was a kid back then, but I still had access to an ATM card and stuff like that. Was worried that whatever had gotten into my phone might be able to get into more delicate areas of my life, and from there, God knows what. Still, being a dumb kid, I took zero precaution. Just forgot about it like I did everything else. We had a good laugh about the random texts my phone would send, as they were either wordy or total gibberish and would fire off at any hour of the day. Super weird and funny for whatever reason. Then, my laptop joined in on the chaos. It froze one day, then rebooted. The login screen taunted me with the same menacing message. "All your secrets belong to us." I felt like I was being watched, like someone was waiting for me to make another mistake. I stared at the screen in silent horror and wondered what they were talking about. Secrets? Belong to who? What secrets? My stomach flip-flopped at the notion. Again, young and stupid, I just closed the screen to the computer and imagined it would all go away. It would be back to normal again in the morning, if not maybe after school. Just have to fix itself. But I wasn't the only one experiencing strange issues. My dad mentioned his phone was acting up. My mom was struggling with the internet. As the week went by, I was hearing more and more about the weirdness in our home. Internet going in and out, smart things acting up, apps doing whatever they want on the phones. It was like the Wild West for technology in our home, and it happened all at once. Only I knew where the problem had come from. I knew then I'd brought something sinister into our home, something I couldn't handle all by myself, but what options did I really have? Telling meant telling on myself. One night as I lay in bed, our security system blasted to life, and I can't express how terrifying it was to be woken up by something so overwhelming. Alarm systems like that are so loud they rattle your teeth. They thump inside your chest and displace every piece of hair on your head. It's a very uncomfortable feeling, even when you're awake, so for that to go off in the middle of the night had me on borderline hysterics. The alarm sent us scrambling into the living room, our hearts all racing. My dad quickly checked the doors, but there was nobody there. Tried to disable the alarm, but it wouldn't budge. I could see his face getting frustrated in the red glow of the screen, punching his code in over and over, nothing happening. It was like a nightmare, but it wasn't going away. Then the unthinkable happened. The alarm ceased, and a voice spoke through the intercom, its tone very chilling.
Hello? Can you hear us?
What? Who is this? My dad screamed into the intercom.
Hi. We just wanted to say that all your secrets belong to us now.
My eyes peeled open and I went numb, literally collapsed against the wall and slumped to the floor. My mom came over to console me, screaming for my dad to call 911. He killed the power to the security system somehow and the speakers went silent. It was then I broke down, confessed everything to my parents. They were shocked, but quickly sprang into crisis mode, taking down notes on everything that I could tell them. They were furious, naturally, but we were already in the thick of it. There's nothing else to do. We all slept in the same room that night, just to be sure nothing else crazy was going on. The next morning, they contacted the police and all kinds of different damage control experts, namely their personal taxes and financial people, even a cybersecurity guy. They made a report and then got the lowdown on everything that could go wrong and how bad it actually was. Ultimately, we had to replace all our devices and some smart tech around the house. From there, we needed all new logins, emails, and super strong passwords. Everything was on VPNs and encrypted in our house, way before there were ads about it online. It's a huge pain in the butt, very long, strenuous, and expensive, but came as the recommendation. The USB port was extracted from the wall, but it yielded nothing. The investigators said it was nothing but a dead drop with some angsty essays written by teenagers and young adults. Even some crappy poetry, a couple of random codes for random things. No malware, no virus, no nothing like that. It was as if it jumped onto my phone and wormed its way through our stuff, and it only existed there. It was all very creepy to think about. We had to replace every device, change every password, and endure a long, grueling process to secure our digital lives. It was a nightmare, one that I foolishly invited right into our home. As we struggled to rebuild our digital security, I realized how lucky we were. Our finances were intact, our private lives remained private, and we avoided the shame of being hacked. There are some true horror stories of people losing everything to scammers and hackers, so to come out unscathed was really a blessing. I learned a hard lesson. Never mess with things you don't understand. Never underestimate the power of the unknown. It was almost like taunting a raging bull, and I was powerless to get out of its way. The internet is much the same. You don't ever want to turn its eye on you. From that day on, I treated electronics with respect, never taking their security for granted. The memory of that USB port and its sinister message remained etched into my mind, a constant reminder of the dangers lurking in the shadows of the digital world. Dangers we can't even perceive. You wouldn't want all your secrets belonging to them as well, would you?